Okay. Welcome back from break. We've come to a very exciting part of the program. Many of you have been following the progress on our collaboration with SNOMED International on the LOINC ontology, which is also a LOINC and SNOMED CT interoperability solution. And the purpose of today's session is to provide a bit of a progress report and some news on where we are in our efforts. I will say that this is truly a collaboration in terms of capitalizing and exploiting in a good way the complementary nature of LOINC and SNOMED CT. It's also a very effective collaboration from a people perspective. Our respective organizations enjoy working together. And I think that's because we have shared goals and shared constituents, which makes sense for us to work together. We thought it would be helpful to begin with some background so that everyone is on the same page about the project. Next. So Regenstrief and SNOMED International have been committed to working together for quite some time to improve better health and better care through standardized terminologies. But a formal agreement that reflects our commitment was initiated first in 2013, and then we renewed that agreement in 2022 and 2024, and we anticipate some future agreements as well. Our commitment to promoting the use of standard terminologies is focused on supporting enhanced clinical system functionality and interoperability by establishing principled relationships between LOINC and SNOMED CT. And we also want to provide effective support for providers and users who implement different combinations of LOINC and SNOMED CT, and also provide support to users who use either LOINC or SNOMED CT. And of course, the solution that developed from all of this work is the LOINC ontology, which I mentioned before is a LOINC and SNOMED CT interoperability solution. It's actually a LOINC extension of SNOMED CT, where SNOMED provides the ontological framework and LOINC provides the content. And the ontology offers the ability for users to distribute LOINC content to both LOINC and SNOMED CT users in a common and understood framework. And that happens by creating LOINC and SNOMED CT codes for all concepts that are shared between the terminologies. The ontology makes it easier for implementers to have a unified approach for implementing each standard. And it, as I mentioned before, it offers choice to select codes based on clinical or regulatory requirements. I think that's an important use case. The ontology is owned and maintained by Regenstrief, including responsibility for the model. But what's important to note is that SNOMED International has provided some invaluable collaboration and ideation that has helped the ontology come to fruition. So what we like to do now is we want to describe our work together, and we describe it as our work together as two terminologies, one collaboration. And what we'd like to do here is share some lessons learned, but also share some upsides, some expected, some not, from our collaboration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the lessons learned in the joint collaboration, and then I'm going to ask our colleagues here to elaborate on those. And I think it's important that we introduce ourselves. We neglected to do that earlier in the interest of time. And I'll ask each person, if you have a microphone, to introduce yourself to the group.
Is it on?
It
Okay,
is.
great. I'm Suzanne Santa Maria, and I'm a senior terminologist with SNOMED International.
Stan Huff, working as a consultant for Graphite Health, also a co-chair in HL7 Clinical Information Modeling Initiative, and a clinical committee co-chair within LOINC.
I'm Jim Case. I'm the chief terminologist for SNOMED International.
Hi, I'm Stephen Wagers, Director of Technical Services for Health Data Standards at Regenstrief.
Sorry, technical difficulty, user difficulty. I'm Kelly Crew. I oversee the collaboration portfolio for SNOMED International. First time LOINC Conference attendee and big fan.
Yay.
Isa Hafeza, Director of Terminology Services and Operation at the HDS.
Okay, so thank you. So here are the lessons learned, some lessons learned from our joint collaboration. Prioritizing content domains and scope. I think this is an ongoing lesson learned from us. And some of this has to do with priorities, demand, and resources. Navigating the inherent structural differences between the two terminologies. Alignment, reconciliation of modeling rules and heuristics. Clarity on editorial governance. I think here initially we thought we would merge some of our committees, et cetera. We found that we don't necessarily need to do that, and we have a different approach for that. This is a little bit more technical. Batch cleanup was necessary in LOINC and SNOMED CT in order to accommodate the ontology. And then coordinating release schedules. That's a discussion we just had. And then in the context of using laboratory parlance, the lessons learned from our joint collaboration are probably too numerous to count. They're not necessarily bad things. They're things that we just learned. So with that, I'll ask some of my colleagues if you want to elaborate on some of the items here. Can you see them? So the batch cleanup in LOINC and SNOMED CT to accommodate the ontology. Who'd like to elaborate on that a bit? Jim, it looks like you had something to say. Oh, Isa, you'd like to? Sure.
The first case we had, an example of this case is that we had almost 1,500, maybe less, maybe more, terminologies that are related to allergen testing and that are pre-coordinated with the RAST method. So we have the component that's with the method, all considered as a component in the lab observations. For us, when we have talked to our colleague, it was preferable to go ahead and separate them because it will allow not only post-coordination, but also it will fit the cleaning about the concept being able to be clean, reusable, general, and it can be used across other tests than just the allergy testing with the specific method. So we had to go ahead and deprecate 1,500 almost related allergen plus RAST method in pre-coordinated format in the component and recreate these concepts again with making sure that the methodology attribute axis, if you want to say in the LOINC terminology, capture the RAST method and had the component just as a component without that method attached to it.
So that's one example. Thank you for that, Isa. And I think we're going to go into RAST a little bit later. Jim, did you want to comment?
I think one of the things that was mentioned yesterday about the vagaries of IVD testing is that oftentimes some of the descriptions of the components that are being tested for are combined components. So one of the examples that was given yesterday was HIV 1,2 plus antigen, all measured simultaneously within the same test. And handling that in the SNOMED terminology was a little bit challenging because we don't have the notion of combined components. And so we had to come up with a method for how we could fit those combined things into our model in order to adequately and appropriately represent them in a SNOMED model as opposed to the way that they're represented in the LOINC model. So there were challenges on both sides in terms of things that were constraints placed on us by the nature of the tests that were being represented in LOINC. So that was a learning experience for us, and we had to come up with some fairly creative ways on how to handle that in the SNOMED model.
Good. Maybe Kelly, I don't know if you want to talk about sort of coordinating release schedules, if you'd like, or Stephen.
Well, I mean, release schedules like to look at what the LOINC community does. And as this is a derivative product of LOINC in a SNOMED CT format, makes sense to follow the release schedule that you have. That being said, there is requisite amount of time that's needed after the LOINC release for, the teams to come together to do the necessary quality assurance work that we need to do, particularly as we approach the release of the first extension, because we really want to ensure that that's the highest quality, best usability, and is really meeting the user needs and expectations. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think those are the high points there.
Right. I don't think we had an appreciation of the nuances of what was needed for our various release schedules. We didn't know your requirements, et cetera, so that we can have an appreciation of when we really needed to make the first release available.
Well, and I think at the beginning it was, let's just work and get this done. And some of those finer points, and while we might deem them or term them to be logistical in nature, they are very important at the end of the day. So,
right. Any other comments from anyone on some of these items? Okay, Stan.
I'm just putting in a placeholder because we have a great set of slides that go through a lot of these particular issues. And I love those, so I'm just trying to create some anticipation for the.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So, as I mentioned before, there's some, there are some, upsides from our joint collaboration. As I said before, I think as humans, we tend to focus on the challenges, but there's also good things that we didn't necessarily anticipate. One is we have a methodology to meet real world needs that came out of this collaboration. This is technical, and I think many of us are technical folks, so we'll get this. The automated transformation of the LOINC terminology into the SNOMED concept model for observable entities conserves resources. That's an important thing. I don't think we understood the extent of conserving resources by doing that until after we had done so. The effective and efficient quality assurance validation using the transformation. I think there's some, valuable upsides from that. And again, this is very technical. No need for grouper concepts in LOINC, in the LOINC extension, and instead we'll use ECL. And so that's the recommendation. And again, are we going to talk about that in the back end of the slides, or? We are. Okay. All right. So with that, let's dig into the details.
Marjorie.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Oh,
Sorry,
more.
do you mind? Because it was such a great way that you introduced that last slide and talk about the upsides.
Yeah.
Coming into this, and I came into this about, a little bit more than halfway through the project. So I wasn't there for the boots on the ground first stages of the collaboration in terms of how things were initiated. But I think you can't underestimate the amount of work, effort, sensitivity that goes into two different separate organizations coming together to work on achieving a joint and common goal. Even down to the day-to-day objects, such as how do we communicate, what tools and platforms do we use? Marjorie made a really good point, just singling out the release schedule as an example. And, we're different in a lot of different ways because we're two separate organizations. So from a collaboration perspective, there's a lot of that storming and norming and forming before you get to a really good cadence of working together. And I think everyone is very respectful of everyone at the beginning. And so sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get to the crux of some of the issues. And from my observation, just the team has done an excellent job now at raising those really critical issues, addressing them in a really respectful, thoughtful, and collaborative way. And we've really seen some great gains towards the latter part of this project. And
Right.
Yeah.
And the ultimate beneficiary of that are our users. So I think we have a few more lessons learned. We put them on 2 slides. So the division of labor, there's no duplication of effort in the content. The gain from diversity because of complementary skills and knowledge. The sustained community interest is also a positive upside. And there might be some others that you'd like to comment on. No? Okay. So I'm sure they will come out as we continue the presentation. So with that, we're moving on to modeling and technical updates. And these are modeling and content considerations. And who's doing that slide? Yeah. I'll switch places with you.
So these are sort of the, if you will, the assumptions that we had about the collaboration. And I have the same trouble that Charlie we had yesterday. The thing on the screen is too small for me to read, and but we need to do this stepwise, and we probably realize that even more now than we did in the start, that it's going to take quite a while to get all of the LOINC content into the SNOMED extension. So we're doing that incrementally. We're working first on quantitative lab. I think that's, those are some of the most used LOINC codes. And in some ways they're easy, but we found out that they're not all easy. So we're doing that. We're going to do quantitative lab. Then we're going to also do the coded labs and make lab complete. And then we'll move on to clinical. We'll move on to document ontology. We'll move on to further description of panels, and then questions and questionnaires, and then imaging, et cetera. So it's a methodical process to work through each of the domains and the different styles of models for things. So there are actually 2 things that we committed to. It's not all one way. And what I mean by that is the major thing we're doing is taking all of the LOINC content and bringing it into the SNOMED extension. The other thing that we agreed to do is that existing observations that are in SNOMED, we would make LOINC codes for those concepts and represent those as well in the LOINC database. We haven't done, as far as I know anyway, we haven't done any work to do that, to benefit from the things that already exist in SNOMED, but that's part of the scope of what we want to do. A very key part of what we're doing is, if you will, and Jim is very careful to point out the difference. We're not, in the traditional sense, we're not mapping LOINC codes to SNOMED codes. What we're actually doing is we're matching LOINC part codes to SNOMED concepts, and then we're re-representing the knowledge and structure of a LOINC code in this SNOMED extension, And we're assigning, that aggregate thing does get a SNOMED code, but it's not mapping in a traditional sense at all, except at the level of the parts. And that becomes very, very critical. And it's what brings the power, if you will, of putting the LOINC content into the SNOMED ontology, because when that concept that's in a component, if that's a drug name, name of a cell type, or we have body locations and specimen types that are in the system part of LOINC, those things are now concepts that connect to all of the other concepts in SNOMED. And so you can now start inferring what are all of the drugs, what are all of the laboratory tests that look for amphetamines? What are all of the tests that look for hepatitis C? What are all of the concepts? You can reason about the fact that hepatitis C is actually a virus, and what are the, how is that related to hepatitis A and B and all of those? So it opens a tremendous capability for better understanding, better use, better inferencing and clinical decision support and analytics because of that semantic representation. So that's a very key part of what we're doing. We decided not to make grouper codes, at least at this time. We might find out later there is some good reason to have them, but most of the things that you use grouper codes for are now can just be used through ECL. You just make an expression and you can select all of the things that you want, or you can see what's subsumed by a given observation. So we think that the ECL will, use of ECL will obviate the need to make intermediate codes just for the purpose of organizing the content. But we need some more experience and see how that goes and make sure that that's true. So there is then in the extension, the LOINC identifier will be attached to the concept for that same meaning in SNOMED. So you in the SNOMED extension, you can see the LOINC code alongside of the SNOMED code that identifies that same concept. And then one thing that we agreed and makes a lot of sense is that the fully specified name for these items in SNOMED would be in the extension would be created consistent with the rules for fully specified names for the international edition. And that's so that if or when appropriate, the LOINC concepts could be promoted into the international edition for use, more broadly throughout the world. So those are some of the things that we've agreed to do and that we're working on. Now, this is the fun part I was telling you about. So now I apologize.
Stan, before we go on,
yeah.
can I make some comments on
Yes.
on mapping?
Yeah.
So I think many of you in this room have done mapping between terminologies. And you know that sometimes it's difficult to determine whether or not one concept in one terminology is semantically equivalent with another concept in another terminology. One of the advantages that we have in the approach that we've taken is by looking at the LOINC parts, it's easier because these are little discrete elements to make sure that we have an exact semantic match between the concept in SNOMED and the LOINC part itself. So once we ensure that all of those parts are semantically equivalent between the two standards, then the LOINC code or the SNOMED representation that comes out of that, we know is semantically equivalent with the LOINC code. And so we know that every concept in the LOINC extension, in the SNOMED representation, is exactly semantically equivalent to the LOINC code as it's represented in the LOINC files, which is something that's difficult to achieve if you're looking at concept to concept mapping between two terminologies.
Thanks, Jim. That's a great explanation of why that's so important. So the next few slides are just going to show actual changes that we made in the representation of some concepts in LOINC to make them actually conform to our own model, if you will. So one of the issues, it's actually, and sorry, this is the stuff I get excited about. And so if you're worried about healthcare policy, you can just read email for now. But if you have sort of the genetic defect that loves this kind of terminology and stuff, like perk up. This came up, actually Rob McClure was one of those who brought it to my attention, that people were looking at LOINC and saying, well, there are all these things that are being inherited or would be implied to be inherited in the LOINC ontology that are not related at all. And that's the set of things were things that were actually very common things, like calf diameter or head circumference or height or weight or other things. And in the laboratory, these things are like the color of the color of the specimen, the appearance of the specimen, other things. Now it's subtle, but what's going on there is you remember the base paradigm of LOINC and actually of measurement theory is that you're measuring some component in a system and some kind of property about that component. So it's, sodium is the component that you're looking for. Sodium, it's about sodium, if you will, and it's in urine or serum as the specimen or system. And then you're asking, well, what is the concentration of sodium in that system? What's the concentration of sodium in that system? Well, all of the things that fall into this pattern are things where you're actually, all of those things don't exist. What you're really talking about is you're talking about, if you will, an inherent attribute of the specimen itself, not a component in the specimen. So all you need to say is, I want to know the color of the urine, or I want to know the color of, I want to know the appearance of maybe a body fluid sample, etc. So what it really says is that there are a set of things, and we actually recognize these things in a sense, but not so obviously and not so straightforwardly as we recognize it now. And that is that we recognized it in the past because things like weight and height, what you saw is that in a component we said height, and then in the property we said length. And then if you think about it a while, you go, well, yeah, the length of the body is the height of the body. So all of these things in LOINC, what we did is we thought of synonyms to put in the component name for what really should have been in the property. And so what we needed then to correct this is basically move that thing that we're saying in the component into the property and not say anything in the component. But we've got this 6-axis model. We're still, trying to make that work with all of the rest of the machinery of LOINC. So anyway, with that long, tedious explanation, so you have things like this that we had, color of sputum. This this top part stays the same, and that's actually, the long name. A lot of people, that's all they would care about. But in the old way, we had color in the property, and then we had type. Didn't add saying type there doesn't add a lot of a lot of value. And so in the new one, what happens is we said in the concept, or in the, excuse me, in the component, we said observation, and then the property, the actual property that we're talking about of sputum is its color. And so we put observation there. And so what's happened is essentially in sort of the new style of these things, the names, the long and short names really are staying the same, but observation essentially is a nice word to put there that really means the component is blank. Because LOINC is all about observations. They're all observations. So that there's a series of these things. Blood product type. Again, you know, what you're doing is just talking about this is an inherent, measurement of, well, it's not a measurement in this case, you know, it's a blood product unit. So again, it's observation, and then the blood product is now down in the system. So this, in this case, is where the system was up in the component when it shouldn't have been. So it's a blood product unit, and then we're doing the type of that unit, essentially the ABO type of that unit. This one, again, specific gravity, you might not think, it was previously defined with specific gravity in the component, and this says relative density, RDEN, relative density, and it is a relative density, but specific gravity, if you will, is just a more specific type of relative density, because it's the specific gravity is the density of the fluid you've got compared to the density of water, of pure water. And that's the definition of specific gravity. So the new version, basically, you have, again, the component just says observation. The property is specific gravity, because that's what you're actually measuring on this sample, is the specific gravity. Those things are coming along. So the another set of things that was challenging was to think about more specifically with very common measurements that we all understand and know, in a sense, like mean hemoglobin concentration and mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, et cetera. Those are measurements that represent average concentration in red cells of compounds. And so the proper description of that is to call it entitic, meaning that it's per cell, as opposed to just everything in the sample taken together. And so those, again, we then move from basically saying that the component was mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration to saying, oh, it's hemoglobin concentration, but it's an entitic mass concentration as the property of what you're measuring. And you really think about the sample also being more precise. The sample in this case is a population. You're representing a measurement on a population of red blood cells. So all of those things are made more correct and more understandable by the new modeling. Again, another thing, and this comes out to be important in a lot of concepts. We have in the component, we had bacteria identified, by culture from a sample, an oral sample from the mouth. The thing is, you know, identified is that's the kind of property that you're measuring. And so having identified in the component name again is not proper. Where bacteria is what we're identifying. And so it should say bacteria in the component and identified in the property column for those kind of things. And there are just a whole bunch of those that followed that pattern in LOINC that we needed to change and make correct by moving those things into the right location. And so, you know, they're bacteria identified, they're fungal identified, there are, you know, all kinds of things like that where that identified shouldn't have been in the component. Now, what you can see though, like the other things, the long name and short name turns out to be the same. So it's easily readable for people who are looking at the long and short names. But when you start looking at the meaning by each of the attributes combined, then it's important to put it in the right place. This is the example that Isa was talking about where, again, this guy says deprecated because this is a change that was already made, but alkylase IgE antibody RAST, that was the component name, and RAST is the method. And so we fix these by basically just moving RAST out of the component into the appropriate methodology technique place. And then this is the same sort of thing for entitic properties of platelets that we had for red cells. Same sort of principle there. And then we have things like this. Well, this one's interesting on two accounts. The glomerular filtration rate is a theoretic thing that you can't measure you don't measure directly by looking at molecules passing through the kidney. You measure substances that are passing, and then you infer the glomerular filtration rate by what you measured in serum and then what comes out in the urine. And there are different compounds that you can use to do that, et cetera. So it's a calculated value and typically depends on a serum and a urine measurement. And so that was a new thing, again, in sort of the whole theory and model of these kind of measurements. And what I mean by that is that, again, the basic theory that came from measurement theory is the component in a system and some property of that you're measuring. With these things, when you're making a calculation, now what you're doing is you're making two measurements and then you're doing a mathematical calculation. And so then you can say, well, what are you really measuring? Well, I'm measuring glomerular filtration rate. Well, you're not actually, I mean, you are and you aren't. But other things like this don't have common names other than just to say what you did. Like when you do creatinine albumin ratio, or you do ratio of some cell type, some white blood cell type for the, based on a percent of all other, and you say, well, what is that measuring? Or an anion gap. We have a name for it, but you can't, it's not like measuring a chemical species. It's now a theoretical calculated thing. And so we had to come up. The other thing with this one that's tricky is this was sort of one of the first examples of things that are now normalized for body surface area. So there's a lot going on here, because what you're doing is you're actually using information of the patient's age and weight and other things to estimate the patient's body surface area, and then you're normalizing this glomerular filtration rate based on that calculated. So those things we had to figure out, where to put them, and I can't read all of the fine print even myself up here, but that's the kind of thing that, we zip through like 90% of things that are that match the standard model. And then when we get to these things, then we have some fun conversations to understand really what it means and how it works. So there's also situations where we were putting into the component macroscopic and microscopic observations, that word. And again, that's the methodology that you're using, not inherently something that you're measuring about the solution. So it shouldn't be in the component, and we move those things out to their proper place. And one of the most used LOINC codes is the specimen type, where people are post-coordinated. They're saying the exact specimen type that some other, some main test was done on. And so we fixed that, guys, so that it actually said, instead of specimen source identified, again, that identified word shouldn't be in the component. Specimen should just be in the component. And specimen normally, though, would have been in the system, but because we're talking about a thing that is the system, we had to make a proper model for it. So that's where that is. So that's all I can say. And thanks for staying awake. But truly, of all of the things I do, it's looking at this kind of arcane classification of these kind of things. And I just, I can like do that forever and lose track of the time, better than watching a good movie. So anyway, now, are you going to talk about this, Suzanne, in place? All right. Sure.
Okay. It's still working. Oh, okay. So I wanted to share an overview of the process that's used to transform the LOINC terms to the SNOMED CT concepts in the extension. And this is the process that we used when we were creating the technical preview release last fall, which had about 23,000 LOINC terms modeled in the SNOMED extension, or the LOINC ontology. So start with the input files. So there are a few input files I'll mention. First, the most important one being the LOINC content itself, the starting point. So we use the LOINC part details file from Regenstrief, which contains the LOINC terms themselves, as well as the LOINC parts that are used to define each LOINC term. And then some parts will have subparts, which contain additional information that's needed to properly model the concept. So this might be challenge, information, adjustments, divisors that are mapped separately than the component itself. And then next up, so we have a map from LOINC parts to SNOMED CT concepts. This map from the LPs to SNOMED concepts to the foundational hierarchies of SNOMED. So substances, organisms, specimens, concepts like that. Right now, the map's being maintained in the Snap to SNOMED tool. It's a collaborative mapping tool that we've started using in the past year. I feel like it's working pretty well for us. So whoever was trying to get rid of the spreadsheet or Excel spreadsheet, we moved the map from Excel to a collaborative authoring platform. That's been helpful. So the next set of input files are templates. So these are SNOMED templates that contain rules for modeling how the concepts will be modeled. So what attributes, SNOMED attributes are used, what are the allowed values for those attributes. And then there's also rules in there for the names of the concepts. So terming for fully specified name, preferred term, and those names are automatically populated from the modeling, from the attributes and the values in the modeling, which I think someone had mentioned earlier. So as you can imagine, we don't want to manually model what is LOINC, 100,000 LOINC terms. So we're using this automated process for the modeling and the terming, which is based on the map and is part of this whole process. So I will mention that so far, in about 30,000 LOINC terms that we've modeled, we're using 7 templates to model those. So you can imagine the template for modeling susceptibility observables is a different template than it's used to model concentration observables or process observables. And the LOINC property is how we're deciding which template to use. So based on the LOINC property, whether it's a concentration or susceptibility, then that will dictate which template's being used. Now that we talked about the input files, mentioned the process document. So first off, we have a human readable sentence form process document. It's in the Google Doc where we have all the rules for how the concepts should be modeled, back up. First off, it'll just have instructions on what files we need, where the file's located. So basic information like that. And then also if there's some rules for modeling or terming that aren't in the templates, they'll be included in there. Any exceptions for how the concepts should be modeled, exceptions for terming, modeling, we have those in the process document. So we have the human readable version. And then based on that, our technical expert working with us on the SNOMED side, Peter Williams, created a script, I believe it's a JavaScript, which takes, which is the magic, part of the magic, I think, behind this process. So he takes all these input files, and then the script will create LOINC concepts, SNOMED CT extension concepts based on all of that. So they're first created in a Google Sheet. So sorry to bring that up, but it's good to to review, it's beneficial to review some of the concepts before we go through the whole process of creating them in the authoring platform, et cetera. So first we can do a quick review in that Google Sheet. We can look at the proposed modeling, the proposed terming. It'll also give some indication of why something didn't, happen. There's some notes there so we can try to troubleshoot what went wrong. If we're happy with the review there in the spreadsheet, then we'll go ahead and put the concepts into a task in the SNOMED CT authoring platform. And from there, we can run classification on the concepts and then review that. So we can see, so generally, more specific LOINC terms will become subtypes of more general LOINC terms. So LOINC terms with methods will become subtypes of ones without methods, and down the line. So if we're happy with that classification results, we'll go ahead and save that. And then at that point, we can also further review the content in a browser that's available so that we can see the hierarchical relationships that are created. That's a good place to review, if those relationships created were as expected, if they're correct, if they need to be adjusted, so forth. So as you can tell probably imagine throughout this whole process, there's review at every step. So whenever we see something that needs to be updated or fixed, we'll go ahead and go into wherever in the whole process, wherever that needs to be fixed. And we're constantly, collaborating with this team. Sometimes we'll have to contact some external collaborators if we need their advice on modeling decisions, so forth. So we repeat the process as needed until we till we get it right and we're happy with the results. So that's kind of a quick overview of the process used. I don't know if we want to take any questions about it now or at the end. Is there any particular questions about this aspect? Seeing none, okay. Okay, thanks.
This future content directions, was that you, Stan? Yeah, okay.
So, this is really, further, and I would say future work that we need to do as we progress in this in this joint collaboration. We need, especially when we get to doing the document names, then we need a formal representation of our document naming, because document names, as you know, are not observables. So they don't fit into an observable model. You're not measuring some substance in a system and some property of that substance. We're talking about settings and, you know, the subject matter domain and all of those kind of things. And so that's going to be a whole new development and will require that we have a shared, essentially machine readable concept model for documents as opposed to observables to represent that LOINC content. This has already been done. The calculated observables really become things in their own hierarchy because they're different than the standard model of measurement. And so that's already been done. And, you know, we're learning about that. But I mean, in a kind of an unfortunate thing in a sense is that you can describe them by saying what other measurements participate in the calculation, but the calculation itself, you know, doesn't have a meaning in terms of just being a substance or a cell type or something like that. And so we have done that. One of the big sort of global design considerations is how to represent value sets in SNOMED and then make the relationship between those value sets and the coded attributes, coded LOINC codes, if you will, that have a value set, and managing the other kind of design principles related to that when the value set could be an example value set or a preferred value set or a normative value set. So that's I think that the challenge here is not whether we can do it. Actually, it's that there are several choices in how that can be done, and we're talking about the pros and cons of those different methods. But that's work. And then we need to make the connection between the value sets and the codes. We need to do more around panels and collections. So in the current work, we are putting the panels in. The panel names are part of what we're producing. The panels in the first version won't be connected to all of the parts that they contain. All of the elements that they contain. So we'll have a name, if you will, for the basic metabolic panel. You won't be able to tell in the first release of the ontology that serum, potassium, chloride measurements, et cetera, are what are in the basic metabolic panel. So we need to figure out more about how to do that. What we are ensuring is that the group names that we do, the panel names that we put in, that all of the parts of those panels are also defined in the release. So other things, the survey instruments, and this will come up more in clinical data. I don't know that this ever comes up in laboratory data, but you know, you have survey instruments where you have and the, you know, like APGAR scores, probably the one that I know, and you're measuring characteristics of the baby, how it cries, what its skin tone is, you know, other things like that. And those are described by actual things that say that, you know, they've got, you know, they're pink and happy. I'm doing a really bad job. We need a better, but that gets a 3. And then if they're not so happy or not so pink, they get a 2, etc. And so you have both in those surveys, you have both a textual description, and then you have a rank or a score And those scores are important because then you sum those up and it gives you a prediction of how well the baby's doing overall. And so we need to represent that kind of construct as well, ultimately. And then there are language translations, and I think as far as we've gotten has been putting that on the slides. We haven't, I don't remember us ever talking seriously about how we want to manage the language translations, because there are a whole set of volunteers, at least on the LOINC side, that do the translations, the language translations for LOINC. And I'm not sure I even know all of the details of how the translations are done for SNOMED and the member countries there. So that's a future work for sure in that place. So upcoming releases, I think that's not me, right? Kelly.
Thanks, Dan. Everyone still with us? Show of hands. Great. So I just wanted to start by saying, coming into the process halfway, I have felt extremely privileged to work with this group of individuals, not only the group of individuals who are on this panel today, but also the ones that aren't with us up here on the stage, who have put in a tremendous amount of work, from both sides, liaising, collecting feedback, guidance, user directions, et cetera, from respective user communities. And I think that's really helped guide the direction that the teams have taken. I mean, this is a committed, intelligent, community-focused, and really mission-driven group of people. And as I was thinking about that, I was saying, you know what, that's really like our two organizations as well. And I think for those reasons, we've been able to overcome any challenges we've had in the past about how our organizations work together, how our standards work together. So it's really been, I think, a pretty significant and critical point about us being able to be here and talking to you today about this, soon to be released extension. So to go back just a tiny bit, and I'll maybe even take it back to 2022, was really the formative point at which we decided to really, buckle down, sign the dotted line, get a formalized collaboration agreement together. That's when the work really started to happen. And that agreement was for a 2-year period. We're about at the 2-year mark right now, and we're just, finalizing and re-signing that agreement now. So continued partnership across both organizations. The technology preview was released in mid-October last year. It was announced to both user communities, and I think there was a lot of good feedback, sustained interest on this. At the time, so it was about 23,000 plus concepts. There's a lot of other information there that you can just read off of the screen. But the technical preview was a really great way to actively solicit feedback on something that we were in current development of. And, the team has been very sure, the LOINC team, to set up mechanisms with which you could browse that technology preview and you could provide your feedback by way of comments, et cetera. There was a defined process with which that feedback was received, and a way that it was discussed across the two teams and then actioned. So that's been a really helpful process. That process will continue to move forward as we look at, nearing when we release the extension itself and its first production release, as well as follow on, because I think both teams really want to ensure that that open communication and dialogue happens as we look at release after release after release. There is some information on these slides, the next set of slides, that have some URLs about where you can find more information. So I won't go into too much detail. March 2025 will be the first release of the LOINC ontology. Thumbs up, everyone? Yeah, okay, that's right. So this will be based on the 2.79 LOINC release in February. We will make some plans to do a formal launch demo, community Q&A back and forth for people once that is released. As I mentioned, there will be feedback mechanisms in place for you to, once you actually get into the extension, to look at it and raise some of your comments, your observations, your suggestions. What will it contain. And so I'm not going to go into like the core content. You've got far more expert resources up here that can talk to specifically what is in the extension itself. It is about 33,000 concepts. So we're seeing about a 10,000 concept increase in what was included in the technology preview. But I think the really important thing to focus in on this is that we wanted to focus on the highest used LOINC terms. So in the extension, while it does have 33,000 concepts, we really wanted to ensure that we have those top 200 most used labs. And so that is what the team has really been tracking and progressing. We also want to really ensure that the first extension is the highest quality, meeting your expectations of what this release has been, billed to deliver. So that's what, as we look at the timelines and as a little bit of what Stan was describing in terms of some of the complex conversations that have had to take place between the two teams, that's why we've been really focusing on getting those right to get to an extension that wasn't rushed, but that is going to meet the needs of the user community. We're going to go through a couple FAQs. I'll do some, and I'm going to, reach out to the panel to respond to some as well. This is really a launch pad then to put, the opportunity over to everyone in this room. And, any questions, comments that you have throughout this panel, throughout the past couple of years on this particular collaboration, happy to have those questions down. We have some time for discussion, so I think we should be fine. So the nice thing is from the technology preview to the production release, not much is going to change in terms of where you go and the resources that you leverage. You've got the URL on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. There will be some updates made to generally the FAQs on the page. So those will be forthcoming shortly. But I put just a little extension here so you can see exactly where you're going to go. There will be, I would say, some probably fairly aggressive communications that will come out as we're nearing the release of the extension. So I think you'll be hard pressed to miss it when it comes out. There is still the opportunity to sign up to the mailing list to get updates on where we're at and details about the finer points of the extension release. Can you browse the extension? Certainly. You've got the URL there. You can browse the technology preview right now as well. And as we're looking to March for the release, and that'll be based on the February release of LOINC, there is still some opportunity now for you to put some thought around what was in the technology preview and maybe about some of the things you've heard here today to liaise with the LOINC team about questions or what you might like to see in the extension. We're going to follow a model for the release of the extension that follows the LOINC releases, as we mentioned previously. So if February and August are the LOINC releases, then March and September will be the extension release, allowing us enough time to do the requisite QA with the teams and ensure that everyone's happy with the product that would be released. Again, getting the first one right is a really high priority for this group. I think I have. Oh, yeah, of course. Marjorie, do you want a mic?
The download is on, where is it? On what website? I know you can go to a URL, but maybe Stephen.
Yeah, sure. Stephen, if you can provide some more information on, the download process, the specification, that would be great.
Yeah. The download is available at that URL listed right there, loincsnomed.org. You go there and there's a form that you fill out, and then you receive an email with a download link, and then you're able to download and see and get the content. There's also other links that are listed there, and an FAQ and a way to provide feedback on that website as well.
Find that link from the SNOMED site.
Yeah, that link will be available from both sources, both from LOINC and from SNOMED. I feel like Jim hasn't had a chance to speak in a while, and he looks like he's really eager to get engaged. So Jim, I'll let you talk about LOINC extension content and if it's included in the international release of SNOMED.
Sure. So as was mentioned at the very beginning of the talk this morning, this is a Regenstrief and LOINC product. And so as a LOINC product, it is not going to be incorporated in the international release, but because it's modeled according to the rules of SNOMED, by downloading the extension, you have a linkage into the international release of SNOMED because it's modeled according to all the rules of the international release. So while it's a separate product that can be downloaded independent of the international release, its real usefulness is if it's integrated into the international release as well, which is simply a process of combining the international release and the extension into a single unit. So I think that the important thing is it's developed independently, but it is dependent upon the international release because a lot of the components that make up the model are contained within the international release. So there is a dependency. So as a standalone product, it's probably not all that useful, but as an integrated product, it's incredibly useful.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone have anything they would like to add to that? Perfect. So when requesting a new LOINC concept, will a new equivalent concept in SNOMED be created as well and vice versa? I don't know if you or Suzanne want to take that one.
Yeah, the long answer to that is no. So when a new LOINC concept is created, then the parts that are in the release files that define that LOINC concept will be used to generate the equivalent concept in SNOMED. So we won't create another concept. It will be just something that's automatically created, much like is happening now with the release files.
Thank you. Now over to the LOINC team. So maybe you can share a little bit with the audience today about how you go about requesting a new LOINC concept for the extension and whether that's something that goes outside of your customarily defined processes or.
We'll go about submission the same way that you go about submission for any LOINC concept using the submission request form or template that we have on the website. It will be actually also helpful to mention that it is something that you are looking to be included within the LOINC SNOMED extension, because that will pay attention to that more since we are in this process right now and we are trying to maximize the amount of the lab observation by applying the needed template or to fit the structure that we are following. But you will go by it the same way you do for any of the concepts submitted to LOINC by using the submission request or template that's on the website.
Great, thank you. Suzanne, maybe you want to take this one. Will there be a map between the SNOMED CT extension content and the LOINC content? I know we've kind of covered that a bit, but good to sum it up.
There's not a map in that there's a separate file or separate maintenance of a map between a LOINC term and a SNOMED CT concept, but we do have a separate file that's in the LOINC extension that does kind of I'm not going to say map, but aligns the LOINC concept in the extension with the LOINC ID that's used in the LOINC terminology. So that association is there, but it's not a map. It's a alternative identifier file that's in the SNOMED download files.
Jimmy, you want to follow up?
Yeah, we have had requests. We're still discussing internally a request for the LOINC part map to the SNOMED map. So at this point, we're still trying to discuss internally what the benefit of that would be, because that's the more dynamic part of the collaboration. And so stay tuned. I guess that's the best I can say there.
You're actually stealing my answer to the next bullet, which was, Stan already kind of handled that one as well. So, I mean, we did this time last year make a point to say we will try and discuss and figure out an approach for translations. The team has been so focused on the actual production of the release that we just haven't gotten to that part yet. And as Stan alluded to, there's a lot of variables that need to be taken into account, both from the LOINC side and the SNOMED side of things as far as translations are concerned. So that's we're going to put a pin in it still, but we will provide some guidance on that particular point. And the last bullet here in terms of the FAQs that we as a team put together to share with you today before we get to your questions is really around implementation guidance, which is really core, I think, to using any kind of tool or artifact the way that it was intended to be used. The teams are right now drafting some implementation guidance. We'll look at it across the two teams, see how it falls. And, there might be an opportunity for some of the teams, as we've already mentioned, sometimes reaching out for some external feedback. So there might be an opportunity to do that as well. But that is a planned component of the release when we get to March. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Marjorie to facilitate the Q&A with the audience.
So this is exciting, guys, and great job. Great job. So round of applause for how much work you guys have really done over the past, I don't know how long it's been since we saw you last. So I have a couple of simple questions. So maybe because I wasn't really following. So one of the things that we were intending to do is have LOINC parts, SNOMED represent, I don't know what the right word is, but SNOMED replace LOINC parts. I mean, there are some things that are LOINC parts that are essentially aligned with SNOMED concepts, right? Head shake, yes. Should be head shaking, yes. Right? Or is there no LOINC part that exactly matches a SNOMED concept?
All LOINC parts map to a SNOMED concept.
Therein
That's
my
the
question.
intent. That's the intent.
Therein my question.
Yeah.
So if we download the LOINC extension, how could we ever use it without the international edition? So doesn't it make sense to make the extension available with the international edition? And are you doing that?
Well, both are available. I mean,
Jim.
so there's no restriction. So
I'm
So-
talking about usability, not, is there something that's useful for a release center? I'm talking about me.
No.
I
Yeah,
want to use it.
Well, I think we haven't been effective in communicating what's happening. Making a LOIC extension. And what you're saying is what Jim already said, which is if you use it alone, it's sort of useless. I mean, you don't gain anything.
Can't use it at all.
You don't gain anything from what you already had. So in the, if you will, even in the browser, in the preview sample, that was loaded on top of the international release. And that's what you'll always see. It doesn't make any sense to not do that. It just recognition that this is a separate product, but it was designed actually to be used in conjunction with, the international release, or for that matter, yes, you could load the international release, the US release, and the LOINC extension.
Well,
So-
so again, I get that for the browser is useless unless it is the combination of the international release and the extension.
Yeah.
And quite honestly,
Yeah.
you could argue that you might want to also add in the US extension, but let's set that aside. Or make it based upon the US edition. But I'll set that aside. This should be LOINC and international. So the browser is going to do that. Fine, that makes sense. It can't work any other way. I'm back to this question of if you're making a download, people who would download it, it seems to make sense to me that you need to make the download include the international release. I understand that may be complicated, but I can't see it being of value to anyone other than a release center or those 5 people who have terminology servers. And maybe that's your target. Okay. But then it isn't the public. You're not going to get feedback from anybody, other than those who have time to go and play with the browser. And maybe that's your intention. I just want to get a sense of what it is.
So the one of the purposes of creating the extension was to provide a representation of LOINC concept in a SNOMED format to members or countries that don't use LOINC. And for the most part, those countries are already using either the international release or a national edition that they've created. So the dependency is already there. So there wouldn't be much sense in downloading the extension if you weren't using the international release as well, because there's no benefit in doing that.
I took a look at the LOINC, the product website, looks quite nice. But my question is, and I think the product website might answer some of it, but some of us will be tasked to go forth and spread the good news of the LOINC SNOMED releases and other terminologies. And we may be educating users who are totally new to standards, to users who have used the terminologies for some time, and even to technical staff that would be downloading and using some of these things. So the product website looks really good with some good information, but how could someone catch up on the work that's been done and being done and get more of that, you know, super geeky background on what is going on? I'd like the idea of the updates that you have, but are there going to be any public meetings? And have there been any papers written yet? And do you intend to write them? And then some of the things I know people will ask, are you going to provide documentation of the decisions of how you made some of these mapping decisions?
Well, I'll start and I'll ask some of my colleagues to join. So in terms of spreading the word, we are planning to have webinars when we release when we have the first release of the LOINC ontology. So you'll join there. We do have, I think we've had some meetings to talk about what's going on at some of our LOINC conferences. Are we having a meeting in Korea? We are in Seoul, but we haven't formalized it yet. That's a very good point. I know you had a lot of other questions. Are we planning to write a paper? Yes, we have a draft. Haven't submitted that yet, but I'll ask my other colleagues if you have some other comments. Jim? You
I
look
just have
kind of-
one quick
No,
comment.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Kim.
So when we released the technical preview as a team, there was some documentation about what is the technical preview, some background, some context that went beyond just the scope of the FAQs that are listed on the website. I think it's an excellent point to take people along the journey that got us to the point we were at, particularly, and I'm a prime example of this. If you're coming in halfway, you want to be able to learn from the decisions that were made earlier on. So I say this looking at my colleagues here, but I think we would be open to expanding the scope of that initial technical preview documentation to include a bit more narrative and a bit more context into some of the process pieces that went into making some of the decisions and how we got to where we were for at least to the point of the first production release.
And is there any, like you had a very nice slide that kind of said the background, but is there something a little bit more expansive that talks about how this got together and, you know, that type of thing?
Yeah.
I think it's living in our heads
That
at the moment.
was my fear.
And I think it's a great opportunity, actually. Let's flip that coin. It's a really great way for us to come together to document, we can work as a group and provide something, because I think you're right. People will want to know.
Right. We do have some internal documents. We haven't sort of coalesced all of that together. I mean, there are things that go back to 2013 that are relevant to that inform what we're doing now. So I think what we're hearing is you need more of the backstory to understand where we are here.
Right. And I think
and that's good feedback.
I think when we educate people, they're going to want to know too, especially people who maybe have used LOINC for a while and have used SNOMED, because I've talked to a few people and, one of the things was we're not mapping LOINC concepts to SNOMED concepts.
No.
And that's
No.
what a lot of people think.
Mhm.
And so, if we could have some of that backstory, I mean, we can get down dirty in the details, and this is a point, a part and that, and some of the people that use these terminologies they just know the concept. They don't know about the axes and that type of thing. So if you could have, some of that background on how it got together and what's your point, and do
Right, right.
that type of thing, I think would be really helpful.
Right, a few myth busters and, dispelling the urban legends and things like that, I think would be awesome.
Yeah, no,
Right?
because there are a lot out there and I've learned so much. And if I'm into it and I'm learning so much, you can imagine somebody that just goes and does mapping or picks codes for a value set for quality measures,
Correct.
and how that's going to affect them. So that I think would be very helpful. And I'm so proud of all the work you all have done. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a question over here.
Well, we received a question online, and I think this is a question probably appropriate for Jim. Can you
Mhm.
please define ECL, its intended use, and how to access?
So ECL is SNOMED's expression constraint language, and it's a formal language that allows a user to create an expression that leverages the underlying concept model of SNOMED to select a subset of concepts that subscribe to the component of ECL. There's an extensive document on how ECL works available from the SNOMED documents website. And so without going into too much detail about what it is, it's a specific language that's used to query the concept model of SNOMED.
So we have a question.
Are you,
Can I? oh.
Did
Can I
you
just
wanna
add
follow
on to it a little bit, kind of tying in the last two comments? So on that LOINC website, there's documentation. I'm not sure if you saw that yet, but at the end of that documentation, there's some example ECL queries that you can pull out. They don't work as well with copying and pasting. We learned you might have to get the formatting, from the PDF out of there. But you see there's, 10 or 15 examples of queries that you can use. You can put in the browser, and we have instructions in there in the documentation of where you go in the browser, put in the ECL query. You can modify it as you want, and then you could see the list of LOINC concepts that are retrieved based on what query you put in. So if you're looking for, I want all LOINC terms that have their components, antibody with property of concentration, et cetera. So that documentation contains examples.
Also on the browser website, there is on the right-hand side of the browser, there's a tab called Expressions. And in that tab, there is a prompted tool for creating expressions. So you can actually play with creating ECL expressions directly on the browser.
A question over here, and then we'll go over there.
okay, well, thank you. Actually, I have two questions. Hopefully they won't be long though. So one is just to be sure that I understood. So basically, if I go to the browser that is on that corresponds to the LOINC I will have the LOINC concepts plus all the international release of SNOMED, or only the concepts of SNOMED that corresponds to the LOINC parts?
You'll have the SNOMED representation, excuse me, the SNOMED representation of the LOINC term, and that will be linked to the entire international release of SNOMED.
Okay, so basically I can have everything international. I have access from there to the international release plus the LOINC.
Correct.
And the second thing was, so because I've been working a lot with microbiology data and methodology, that it was included in the LOINC codes. And then I was also checking on it on the SNOMED browser, and I saw that many methodologies belong both to, some methodologies are in the procedure semantic text, some others are under the qualifier semantic tag, technique qualifier. I was wondering in this new collaboration, where are the methods of LOINC mapped to, qualifier or procedure, and if there is any action going on to unify that?
Okay. Okay. I think that the short answer, in this project, so the methods in LOINC are mapped to technique qualifier value concepts in SNOMED. They're not mapped to SNOMED procedure concept. There's a long history, procedures, observables. I'm not sure we want to get into that here. It sounds like you're aware of that. But in essence, if we model the observables with defined by procedures, it's just kind of a circular type of logic. Because at SNOMED, we consider observables and procedures to be somewhat equivalent. Not all member countries share that view. So we're maintaining both hierarchies. And that's a whole nother story for now. But the LOINC methods are mapped to SNOMED technique qualifier values. That's the short answer.
In our mapping to FHIR, in our models to FHIR, we're basically free to use both methodology because they would work, they would probably both be good. I mean, they could both represent methodologies. That's what I mean, both in cement, in the procedure and in the qualifier, technique qualifier.
But that's a design decision that's based on how you decide to populate things. One of the disadvantages in having either or is that if you're trying to do analytics, then you run into issues because you're dealing with concepts that are derived from two different hierarchies in SNOMED, so there won't be any relationship between them. So the recommendation from implementation is once you decide to bind a SNOMED terminology to an element in a FHIR resource, you should stay within that hierarchy or you're going to lose the analytical capabilities because there's no linkage between multiple hierarchies except through the underlying concept model, but that makes it a lot more complicated to do the analysis.
Thank you, because so far I found concepts that were methodologies that were not, I mean, they were, some were, I mean, they were actually that I needed, that were in a different hierarchy. So I didn't know how to deal with that. So probably I should just submit a new SNOMED concept in that
Yeah.
case.
If something is missing and it's a valid technique, then it should be submitted through your National Release Center to SNOMED so that we can get it added.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. You guys, great work. First of all, Stan, I want to say that I also really appreciate the way that you're refactoring the axes. Because in the past, I've had to design around the fact that, for example, the specimen type was not in the specimen type bucket. And now I've got to go back and fix that. That's good. So my first question is, when are those changes going to be released into the LOINC release?
279, the next release in February.
Okay. My next question is, for those of us that still use the super secret LOINC parts ontology to do things, what is the fate of the LOINC ontology, the LOINC parts ontology?
I probably don't understand the question yet. The only part of LOINC where I shouldn't say that. The only part of LOINC where we have a formal sort of ontology is in the document ontology, where we actually show the relationship of different parts and other things. There, I guess, less formal representation so that we know what all of the allowed kinds of properties are, or we know what all of the allowed kinds of specimens are, that kind of stuff. So could you say a little more?
I mean, in the informal part of the ontology, where you break down the properties and the components and you break things down, it's more of a conceptual hierarchy than an ontology. But we have clients, for example, that use that all the time. So is that going to be around for a while? Is that going to go away?
It'll stay forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so to follow up on Charlie's question, what's going to be the change type? The batch changes are going to be released under in the February release, and that's probably for Stephen.
Okay, it depends on, I'd have to go look to see, probably major.
Major.
Yeah. Also, Isa touched on it on our first day, but we've expanded the change snapshot to include not just the status updates, but all of them. So it's more easy, so you can consume the updates either through our old updates file or this new one. So that's another update that we have.
And which international monthly release will each one of the LOINC ontology releases be based on? We found out that we knew what the LOINC it's going to be based on. Which monthly international release?
So depending on the exact release schedule, it will probably be based on the monthly release prior to the LOINC release. So if it's based on if the LOINC releases in February, it will probably be, I'll verify with Suzanne, but I think it would be based on the January international release. That's it's simply because of the release schedule that we have. If it's later in the month, I don't know the exact date of any time in the month. Yeah, so it's possible. If it's possible anytime in the month, then depending on the time frame, because our goal is to have it a month later than that. So we release on the first of the month. So if we get the new release files from LOINC on the 10th of the month, then the chances are it will be released. It will be based on the February. So if February 10th on LOINC, it would probably be February 1st on SNOMED.
Just as long as both versions for both terminologies are listed on the website so that we know both
Yeah,
sides.
that'll
of
be
the
part of the
equation.
release notes.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, at the last SNOMED meeting, it was presented that an alternate identifier carries a heavier implication than an equivalent mapping. So if the LOINC parts are being mapped in SNAP to SNOMED with an equivalent mapping, how can the alternate identifier for the overall LOINC code carry a heavier weight than that equivalency in the mapping? I'm not sure if that makes sense.
I don't recall that comment. I don't know, Suzanne. Yeah, we would have to take that back to our technical group to find out what that meant and what the source of that comment was.
I think Peter Williams brought that up in the managed services meeting when they were talking about what weight the alternate identifier has compared to an equivalent mapping. And so that's what sparked the question.
And so we can take that back to Peter and get back to you.
Good morning. My question is about receiving data basically from everywhere and anywhere. And the way will the IG document of the HL7 have a preference, let's say in the observables or the observations, will it be LOINC versus SNOMED, or would SNOMED be preferred and then secondary LOINC? What is that hierarchy going to be? And also because SNOMED, it does code for procedures as well. Some hospitals do code CPT codes for those procedures. So are there going to be those kind of hierarchies? And this is another SNOMED, I guess, question is, I was looking at APGAR score. There is the translation between the answer list of LOINC to SNOMED and that observation, and you do find it in the mapping document for ICD-10, but it does not have data available. Is there going to be eventually also a mapping to ICD-10? The reason why I'm asking this is because sometimes I get all this different code systems, and a lot of these values end up being null because one, there wasn't a preference set, or two, there's no translation from one to the other.
So why don't we repeat your first question? You had 3 questions. Repeat your first question.
Well, it's basically on the observables, procedures, and diagnosis. On those 3, usually you could get either LOINC, CPT, and ICD-10, or SNOMED all across. In that being said, is there going to be or translations between SNOMED to ICD-10 or so on? Just because a lot of these might end up coming back null on these fields for me when I look at the data.
So the first time you asked the question, you asked about SNOMED codes versus LOINC codes and transactions, and I assume like in US CDI and other things. So that's actually a choice. I mean, that it's ONC and the regulatory bodies that will say what code you should use there. My assumption would be that we would continue to use LOINC codes in US CDI, et cetera. But in your own internal system, because there's, alternative identifiers, if you wanted to use internally within your own system, everything SNOMED, that's your prerogative. But what code is used in and mandated for interoperability by regulation is up to those regulatory bodies. I'm glad we don't have the responsibility to to say that. Now, the other stuff about ICD 10 and ICD 9 and 11, and that's somebody else.
So we do maintain a SNOMED to ICD-10 map. It's a unidirectional map to ICD-10. As far as I know, we're going to continue to support that for the foreseeable future. I don't know if Cal, if you have anything else. So as new concepts are added to SNOMED, they automatically go into our mapping flow and they're mapped to ICD-10. So that map will continue to be available. But again, it's unidirectional from SNOMED to ICD.
But that's not a part of the ontology, though. That's a separate.
I'm sorry?
I think the question was asked in the context of the ontology. So SNOMED.
So because the LOINC extension is not a SNOMED product, it will not be in the map.
That's the answer.
Thank you. And basically, even if there are those regulations on what is preferred, when I'm with the CDC, so the data I get, regardless of what the standards we ask, sometimes we get everything. So I was just wondering for maybe some guidance on if I get a certain code of some type, if there's going to be resources for me to go and try to find those translations elsewhere.
By translation, you mean maps? Is that what you mean? Okay.
So if I understand the question right, you're following up on Charlie's argument that you get garbage and you're trying to figure out what to do with the garbage when you get it. And so we would want to help you as much as we could. I mean, there are the things that are inherent. That is, if people were sending you SNOMED observable codes for things, then you'll know the LOINC code that corresponds to that. So you'd be able, and if there are other things, you do a lot of the things that Charlie already described in terms of trying to find the corresponding thing. If you're getting CPT codes. Now, in the past, I think, and I don't know if Marjorie or Isa or in the past, there was a unidirectional mapping also from LOINC codes to CPT, because LOINC codes in general are more specific, and CPT are for billing. And so you're grouping things, as you go from LOINC codes to CPT. But I don't know if do you know where, does that still exist and still
It's an old
usable?
map. I don't know I haven't seen it in our files. I know that AMA sponsored that project, and it's probably available from them. That map exists, but it hasn't been updated in a while. Right.
And from the SNOMED side, something similar with the CPT.
Yeah.
It's on.
Another question.
Okay. So I have two. One is really to Stephen, I think. I just want to make sure that I'm going to restate something that Stan always says that I still struggle a little bit with, because there's an element of marginal truth to it, which is that LOINC parts have no meaning, that there's strings, and that they aren't definitional and SNOMED in LOINC concepts, which clearly, as we do this work, that's not so much true anymore. That you don't have to defend that yet, Stan.
Oh.
The question though is to Stephen, though, so when we're making these changes, so the sort of things that you did when you made these changes in the construction of the LOINC with regards to understanding how this is really now, this was better done a property than a component and things like that. What kind of identifier changes are we making for the LOINC parts? And for the LOINC parts, you're not changing the LOINC part. You're making it you're making a new LOINC part. When that thing was a component, it had a LOINC part code, and now it's a property. Is that the same code? So thank you for answering correctly. And then the other thing then, though, the LOINC that it points to, that code doesn't change because the LOINC parts that we're defining it have no meaning, correct? Right. Just everybody
I
following that.
I gotta respond. That's not what I say.
Oh,
I say they're
okay.
not concepts. That doesn't mean they don't have meaning. Okay.
Okay, no.
Okay? And what I mean by the not concepts is that it takes into no account synonyms. So there's in the LOINC parts, if there are LOINC parts that are true synonyms, it's unrecognized, it's not coded, it's not represented. So they have meanings. They have meanings. And
They just don't have
what we're doing, they
LOINC
just don't have concepts. They're not concepts.
They're not LOINC concepts.
They're not concepts in anybody's terminology because they don't have a unique identifier or a unique meaning that's defined by some other external mechanism. They're just the word, and the words have meaning, but they're not concepts.
Okay.
In the sense of a
In the sense of a
terminology concept.
code system concept. They're not a
That's right.
code.
That's
system
right. They're
concept.
not code system
They are
concepts.
concepts, but they aren't
Right.
code system concepts.
Exactly.
And you say in particular, they aren't LOINC concepts, which I don't want to drive us down into this discussion, Stan, but I guarantee you we're not in agreement on this, that
But over time we will be, because essentially what we'll do is make all of those LOINC parts concepts. When
Yeah.
they exist in SNOMED, we'll know that the LOINC concept, they will become concepts.
Okay.
Okay. So in the end, I think we're going to be good.
We will be good when that happens. And, you know, this gets to Charlie's issues, and yeah, it is.
It's your fault.
Come on, Charlie, I thought you were a friend. But because Charlie's not the only group that uses these hierarchies, they're valuable, right? I mean, they're valuable even if they aren't concepts in the context of LOINC. And in fact, I promote how valuable they are. I've embedded them in systems. And so, yeah, you know, this gets to the whole thing of our end game is a very valuable end game where things are, you know, kind of meaning permanence, code system ideas that are identifiable, and, you know, kind of all the things that you want, Stan, all the things that you want. So I get it. But this interim space can create some havoc for those of us, Charlie, that are using these meaningful, non-conceptual ideas that LOINC promotes. So we have to be cautious about how we do things. So thank you, Stephen, because those changes make sense to me that we just discussed. Thanks.
We have a question online. It's somewhat lengthy, but please bear with me. Following up the discussion about lab methods and SNOMED CT that have either a qualifier value semantic tag or a procedure semantic tag, it was said that if methods are missing, new term requests should be submitted. Could you give a hint for which category, procedure or qualifier value, the lab method concepts should be requested for? And then there's a follow-up.
So if you are requesting simply a method with no other information about what the method is applied to, what its values are expected to be, or anything else that would define an entire procedure, then those should be submitted as qualifier values, because those are simply techniques that are performed. If there's more information around that technique, for instance, if there is a component involved, or if there's a timing involved, or if there's some other aspect that would normally be a LOINC part, then those would be submitted as procedures. But if they're laboratory procedures, then we would encourage that they not be submitted as procedures, but they be submitted as LOINC codes and submitted to LOINC.
And then additionally, will potentially missing lab method concepts and techniques, qualifier values, will they be moved from laboratory procedure to techniques, or will they both categories be maintained equally?
We don't have time to discuss that. This has been a long-standing challenge that we've had based on some legacy information or some legacy concepts that we have in SNOMED that have been widely implemented by some of our members. And resolution of the pure technique versus evaluation procedures has been an ongoing discussion that we have not been able to adequately resolve at this point. So our position now is that evaluation procedures that are simply techniques would not be added, that are pure techniques would not be added to the procedure hierarchy, but would be added to the technique hierarchy. And that's our stance on that right now. Well, the way that it is right now, we're going to have to maintain both until we can come up with a global consensus on how to address that apparent duplication.
Thank you. Those are all the questions online.
Are there
Thanks,
any more in the
Howard.
room? Oh, sorry.
Thanks. I'm working with SNOMED and LOINC for a long time, and probably I know that lunchtime, so I'll try to make my question longer than answer. So basically, if we visualize both sides, SNOMED with conception and LOINC with value and explanation for laboratory side, I can see how SNOMED codes will replace LA codes because it's example of test results or answer. I do understand where you're going to place LOINC codes in SNOMED side, but I want to see an example, at least, for instance, botulinum toxin A or B, how you will connect it with a LOINC code in your site in SNOMED, or how LOINC going to connect or provide information and say, for instance, these microorganisms are connected with this type of test or with this LOINC codes and values. That type of connection, not very clear for me right now. Thanks.
I don't quite understand the question yet. Could you just say what kind of connect,
I can see clearly where we're going to put SNOMED on a type of test result in a LOINC page. It's replacing LA codes in the LOINC page.
Right.
I don't see where we're going to add LOINC tests or LOINC numbers on the page of SNOMED, where a connection with values of SNOMED with LOINCs. Not LOINCs with SNOMED, but SNOMED with LOINCs. Which criteria you will select LOINC codes to connect with SNOMED codes and at SNOMED page?
So on the browser, the LOINC code is displayed and it's also searchable. So you can search on the LOINC browser, you can search codes by the LOINC code or by the SNOMED code, either one. So there's an intimate linkage between the two. The LOINC parts themselves that are mapped to SNOMED are not currently displayed or searchable. I don't think they're searchable on the browser page. So the individual LOINC part mappings are not available on the LOINC browser. So right now, the linkage between SNOMED and LOINC is going to be solely at the fully specified LOINC term level. All of those are going to be in the observable entity hierarchy. So they're all going to be in one hierarchy within SNOMED. They're going to be linking up to the observable entity hierarchy within the international release.
My question was regarding terminology connections between the terms of LOINC and SNOMED. I understand where is connection LOINC to SNOMED as a test results. I want to understand the connection when you have a LOINC term with the test.
So are you looking for, how do you connect the values to the LOINC code?
Correct.
LOINC answers to the code? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a different process. We're currently in active discussion on the best way to represent that. We have some proposed technical approaches on how to do that. But we want to make sure that there's not a whole lot of technical burden in order to accomplish it. And it can be integrated within the actual LOINC SNOMED representation. So we want to be able to create that explicit linkage. But as Stan mentioned before, there are some caveats around that, because LOINC answers can be either example or preferred or normative. And so that would require a new structure within SNOMED in order for us to support that. But we recognize that it's a requirement. And I guess, again, stay tuned because we are actively discussing how to do that.
So let me just jump in with one observation. It's not a question. I'm no expert on this, and I only attended the last third of this discussion, but this is really fascinating to me in the sense that this is a lot of expertise is in this room. LOINC, SNOMED, HL7, et cetera. Do not minimize the impact that your expertise and your knowledge base can have as you're talking to other governments, other users, and other stakeholders in this area, because you have a lot of power in what you know. Maybe I'm never going to know all the differences between LOINC, SNOMED, concepts, terminologies. That's not my neighborhood, but that is your neighborhood. But how do you raise that to a level that decision makers, policymakers, and so forth can understand? I think that's also something just for you all to be thinking about as you try to popularize what you all are trying to do and deliver better healthcare to citizens globally. Just an observation. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Thank you. Are there any other, oops, one more question? Oh, sorry.
Will it be possible to browse the LOINC SNOMED browser with LOINC codes? Because I mean, at least the one that I was just checking it right now, I was not able to. Maybe I didn't put the code that is already in it. I don't know.
Sure. So we have a browser. What would you like to look up?
I was, of course, looking for bacteria identified, things like that.
Can you see?
We didn't mod this because of the identified problem.
Oh.
So if there's an example that's not one that was the problem that we presented.
Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. I was just saying that the example you mentioned is one that we talked about earlier was an issue that we had to resolve. So that one's not going to be in the preview browser because it's required a change in LOINC. But if there's one, I don't know if anyone knows their favorite LOINC concept. Well, I think where you want to know if you could search on the actual code. Does someone have a code? Okay, this feels like a little like bingo. Oh, look, there we go. Yeah.
Okay.
So I know it's fuzzy, but in the white box is the LOINC code system ID shown there. And then above that, the SNOMED concept ID, extension concept ID.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And I think it's important to recognize that one of the things that we're really concerned about, and one of the things that has essentially postponed the first release, is that we wanted to make sure that the first release got the most common test that people would request. And so one of the more common requests that you get out there is bacteria identified. It wasn't in there because we had some challenges in representing that, and that required some changes in the LOINC release files. And so all of these things are kind of in flux, but when we have the first release out, we expect that probably 90%, between 85 and 90% of the most common tests performed worldwide will be represented for lab, will be represented in that first release. The second thing is that as we went through this process, we recognized that we had to make some changes internally within SNOMED to the underlying concept model in order to support some of the complexities that there are in the LOINC representation. And one of the things that LOINC has to support is they often have to support the way that tests are created and performed by the vendors or the creators of the tests. And so they're oftentimes very constrained in how they have to represent that and put it within the six parts of the LOINC code. What we've had to do within SNOMED is come up with alternative modeling decisions that are able to adequately represent that, but still get the same classification results. Because one of the important things that we're trying to represent is the taxonomic relationships and the hierarchies that each of these tests have. And we want to make sure that the classification assumptions are appropriate and accurate what the test really represents. And so we can get really down into the weeds, like Stan likes to get, on how those representations are in there. Those will all be represented in the first release. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot more questions once that.
We,
Get an understanding for the machine readable concept model for observables, because that is how this is done. So when you go into SNOMED browser, click on the MRCM and you can see how all the attributes are constrained and what values are used in there. So if you're going to use this, you really need to understand the MRCM for observables and then how it's structured.
I
All
hope
right.
not. I hope not. I hope you'll be able to search using your familiar free text. One of the other thing is, and we didn't explicitly say that, but the LOINC formal name, the LOINC common name, and the LOINC short common name and long common name will all be represented as synonyms within the LOINC extension as well. So everything that you're familiar with seeing in the LOINC release files now will also be in the SNOMED.
yeah, so we have to cut it off there because we're behind, and we have to get to some. I'm sorry. Well, but thank you. This has been great. If you please reach out to any of us that are on the stage or any other SNOMED representatives or our LOINC team. If you have questions, we're here. You can also send your inquiries to what's the URL for questions? Or either loincsnomed.org, but you can also send them to snowmedloinc.org. That's right. So there are multiple ways to reach out to us. We are here throughout the week. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you. It's time for lunch.